Hello, everybody, and welcome to the All Metal Mode podcast. Listening to Mike Hare, myself, and Mr. Dorian Cook. I think we got a really exciting guest tonight for you, and it should be a really good show. Don't forget, Dirt Digest magazine, the March issue is out, came out Sunday. You'll want to check that out. There's some great articles, a great article in there about Camp One Step. And if you check that out, you can see how you can get involved, help out, and all that. And I highly recommend that. So we'll get right to it. Dorian, how you doing tonight?
Hey, doing great. We actually got some sunshine today. I'd forgotten what a blue sky looked like.
That's funny. That is funny. I'm a little flustered. I had some technical issues starting, and I didn't say anything, but that right up till 8 o'clock, I was still working on the show. So I was a little flustered by the time I hit the go live button. So, but I think tonight will be a lot of fun. I don't think I told you, I got to talk to Cori a little bit last night on the phone. He called me.
Oh, great.
We got to talk, yeah. So, I think tonight will go really good and be a lot of fun. You Civil War relic hunters and stuff, I think, or anybody interested in it, will really enjoy this show.
Absolutely. Cori and I have a history. We go back. He and I have done some serious treasure hunting together. We worked on John Swift's famous lost silver mines down in central Kentucky. Boy, were we in some rugged and remote areas. And Cori and I, we're separated by too many miles to hunt on a regular basis, but I'm looking forward to hopefully doing some more hunting with him in the future. Oh, and nice. But he is one of those guys. He's in our We Dig the Civil War group. He's a general in the group. We rank our members by their experience and their contributions. And Cori's one of our 5 generals. So you don't get that honor in our group unless you've been there and done that. So I'm really excited that we could get Cori on the show. Don't think he's ever been on a podcast before, and we're going to have a good time getting some stories and tips and things from his many, many years of experience.
Great. I'm looking forward to it. Dorian, if you're okay with it, I'd like to post this, that we're live on Facebook. So go ahead and just take over and give me a few minutes before I join back in, if you're okay with that.
Okay, sure. Will do. Cori, we'll get right to you in just a moment, but I want to tell everybody who was on the podcast 2 weeks ago when we had Gary Persinger, also a member of our We Dig the Civil War group. Gary is... I'll tell you what, I think he is finding more at this moment than any relic hunter in the country. Today, he went out and he dug over 500 Civil War bullets out of one hole. They're dropped bullets, they were never fired, and the hole is still reading with all kinds of signals. He's going to have to go back and dig, and who knows how long it's going to take him to dig, and who knows what he might find in that hole. He could get into some serious supplies that were dumped, like artillery shells, even baggage or belt buckles, things like that. So I think his best finds are still ahead. But I just want to say, if Gary happens to be listening, congratulations on an incredible find. That is so inspirational. I'm sitting here practically drooling to get out with my detector, and start digging some Civil War artifacts. So anyway, I wanted to let you know, for all of you that had the pleasure of hearing Gary 2 weeks ago. Okay, Cori, let's go ahead and kind of get started here. Are you there? Did you take your mute off?
I am here. I'm off mute, and I'm still salivating at Gary's find. I was early this week. I thought 6 bullets in one hole was doing good. I guess I got some training to do.
Yeah, I've had 2 really big multiple bullet finds, and one of them was 36 Sharp Hankins cavalry carbine bullets, and I thought that was great at Fairfax Station. But at Port Hudson, I found an entire case of 3-ring minis on a slope I'm sure that all 1,500 were there. I did not dig them all because I was interested in hunting Confederate artifacts that day, and I didn't want to spend the whole day digging what is basically, the most common Civil War bullet. So I actually went off and left. I dug 120, and the ground was still reading like one big solid piece of metal in a 6-foot circle. So I have an idea what Gary's going through, and this is his
Time
first.
to go back, Dorian.
Well, you know what, Corey? Can't do it now because they made a state park out of it, and metal detecting is off limits. So, it's a sign of the time. But that's okay. There's still sites out there that haven't even been found yet, and I'm looking for one of those right now. Corey, let me get into some things about you. That's enough about me there. Let's talk about your beginnings, and I was going to ask you, tell our listeners what part of the country you're from, or where you're living. I mean.
Okay, so I retired about 2 years ago. I'd spent most of my working career up in Northern Virginia. I was living in Loudoun County. I retired to Williamsburg, Virginia, so I'm down in Tidewater. I was raised in Newport News, so it's just a hop and skip away from Newport News. So I'm familiar with the area, but when I retired, metal detecting was high on my list. I wanted a place I wanted to be in Virginia. I wanted a place with a college, and I wanted a place with a lot of old stuff. And this Williamsburg was one of the few places that fit the bill. So
that's one of our oldest towns. And I spent some time in the area. We actually did a family vacation with some of our relatives, and we rented the Wayanoke Plantation, where the Union Army threw a big pontoon bridge across the James River, and that was quite an experience. Corey, just curiosity, how old were you when you first got involved in metal detecting?
In metal detecting? Well, let's back up a little bit.
Okay.
I was a pretty voracious reader, even at a young age. Somewhere between 8 and 10, I probably got a hold of a treasure magazine published by a guy named Long John Latham.
Oh, yeah, Latham.
Treasure.
Yeah.
And once I read that, I was hooked on treasure hunting, and it was pirates, war, anything I could think of. I must have bugged my dad for 3 or 4 years to get a metal detector. So finally, when I was probably about 12 or 13, he got a World War II surplus military detector.
You mean a mine detector?
That thing was a mine detector. That thing had came with a 40-pound battery, backpack battery, and it wouldn't detect crap. So, I mean, a guy named Tom Dickey used them for artillery shells, but if you took them out on Virginia Beach or something, we had a nickel on top of the ground, quarter on top of the ground, you wouldn't even hear it. So that was my first experience with a metal detector, but we migrated on to, I think it was a Garrett Grandmaster. This thing was sort of cool. It had a 12-inch coil, but within the 12-inch coil, it had a 5-inch coil. So on the machine, you actually had a switch where you can go from 5 to 12 or back. And those were the BFO days. I mean, these things didn't discriminate worth the beans.
Yeah, I never.
So that was.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It was probably before your day in detecting, even.
Yeah, I started in '72.
Yeah, so this was probably 67 or so. Honestly, that machine wasn't that great. My dad finally got a Metrotech, and that was the cat's meow at that point in time. It's probably 68, 69. It was maybe a 12-inch coil, one knob, off, on, and away you went. And the thing was good to maybe from 4 or 5 inches, absolutely no discrimination. But we were detecting Battle of Williamsburg area, and we were in where I grew up. Newport News was one of the first battles of the Civil War. It was the Battle of Dam Number 1. It was May 1861, I believe. So we got on the outskirts of that and found a few things. And so that was my foray into metal detecting, and then did that a couple of years. And I went off to school and really didn't get back into serious Civil War metal detecting till late 1990s, around 2000, and I've been at it pretty hard since then. I had kids and all that kind of thing, and try as I might, my kids just were not interested in metal detecting. Even if I gave them the pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters, they still weren't interested. So, go ahead.
Yeah, take heart, Cori. I have a 10-year-old grandson going on 11, and I've been waiting, and he showed absolutely no interest. And he came to me the other day, and he said, "Papa, will you teach me to metal detect?" So I'm in.
Oh, that's a good deal.
I'm in grandpa heaven right now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. My kids to this day, they still have absolutely no interest. They'll ask me what I find and stuff, but they are millennials, and they are absolutely not collectors or interested in collecting anything. So that's just the way it is.
Let me ask you something.
More relics for me.
What during that time, the early years there, before you drifted away from detecting for a while, what would you say was the most memorable thing that you discovered that you found?
My favorite finds at the time were, I found two 10-pound parrot shells.
Wow!
And they were in different locations. They were unexploded. I think they were dropped. I don't think they were fired. They were both in Union camp areas, and they were Union artillery shells, not Confederate. One was both of them were just inches under the ground. So that was really my most memorable find. Honestly, we dug bullets and buttons. We only dug one plate at that time. So in the early days, at least our ideas were you go to battlefields and that's where you find your stuff. Well, as things evolved, I discovered that, to me, camps are where it's at. Camps are where you find a lot of your buttons, your buckles, even your bullets. You find things that are in, I'll say, pristine condition, and you generally find more of it. If you want to find artillery, then you go to a battlefield. But camps are where most guys, I would say, have found their buckles, other than maybe a guy like Gary Williams, who's been hunting for years and found a bazillion buckles at Cold Harbor battlefield. Some of the early guys, they found boatloads of buckles in the battle sites.
They did.
I have most of my luck in camps.
And I hope everybody who's listening pay special attention. If you've not ever gotten into Civil War relic hunting and you want to, Cori spoke really great words of wisdom there about the camps. There were 22,000 known conflicts, which were skirmishes, and then a little bigger than a skirmish called an action, and then I think that the third one was an affair, and the big ones were called battles. There are probably at least 100,000 skirmish sites that haven't even been found yet. So there's no records of them, or no official records. They're mentioned in personal diaries and things. So, if you're going to do battlefields and this type of thing, if you can, well, we'll be talking about that. I'm getting ahead of myself here because I have some questions I want to ask you, Cori. By the way, before I forget, Cori, my first 10-pound parrot shell, I was hunting the Kennesaw line with Tom Dickey when I found it. Thought you might find that interesting.
I was in Atlanta in 1984, 86. I did have a metal detector, but I didn't know squat about Tom Dickey. That was one of probably the biggest missed opportunities of my life, is not meeting that guy.
I had the privilege of by finding that shell deeper than he'd ever found one with his brand of metal detector. I switched him to a Garrett that day. He actually bought the Garrett.
Wow.
He bought the Garrett Deep Seeker I was using, but I got to sleep in his shell room where his entire collection was. Oh, you talk about experience, Corey. I didn't get any sleep that night. I was up all night long looking at shells.
Yeah, I've seen pictures of it. If people are interested in Tom Dickey in artillery, Civil War artillery, Google Tom Dickey artillery.
Yeah,
You'll just be amazed at the collection he put together.
Yeah,
I think he's since passed on, and I believe he donated it to Atlanta Historical Museum, but somewhere in Atlanta has his collection.
I never heard where the collection ended up. I think
that's where it is.
I had a few moments of concern. He had an in-wall gas heater and a shelf with a 9-inch, actually 11-inch mortar ball was sitting right next to that gas heater, and the shell was so hot that you couldn't keep your hand on it, and it had a water cap fuse. It had a water cap fuse, Corey, and there was nitrates leaking out as liquid and dripping down from the fuse.
Maybe Tom didn't want you as a friend anymore, Dorian.
Well, the thing is, if that thing had blown, he would have lost probably. Atlanta would have lost their oldest with all the shells he had in there. Atlanta would have lost their oldest neighborhood, and he'd have lost his shell collection. Yeah. So I figured
it would have been quite a boom.
Okay. Well, Corey, when you came back and you got involved in metal detecting, now I suppose when you got involved in the 90s, you hadn't really gotten to the point where you decided that camps were where the best opportunities lay, right? When you first started back in.
Well, I didn't really know that. Actually, I met a guy online. It was AOL days. I met a guy in my area online, and he was willing to take me out to sites. He was just getting out of relic hunting. He was big into big game hunting. So he took me to a few of his sites. We went to the Union winter camps in Falmouth. That was 1862-63 winter camps. We did some Battle of the Wilderness stuff. So he's the one that first introduced me to camps and the possibility or the probability of finding more and better stuff. And from there, I just started doing more and more research on my own. I've been through several detecting partners. It's sort of like a marriage, but he was the guy that really took me under his wing and got me up to speed.
Okay. At what point did water hunting begin to draw your attention?
Well, honestly, I'd always been interested in water hunting, but I mean, from the early 2000s or so, maybe even the late 90s, but I never really spent much time on it. So really in the last 6 or 7 years have I gotten into it. Most of my water hunting actually was, my wife and I would go on a trip to some Caribbean island, and I'd always take a machine with me and see if I could pull some jewelry out of the surf. So occasionally I was successful, but we went to some pretty nice resorts, and believe it or not, I haven't found that much stuff out of the nice resorts. So I guess I have to work harder, or conditions are such, I'm just there for a short window of time, so I'm sort of stuck with the conditions. But anyhow, I've been more and more into water hunting probably this last year or two. My buddy and I were just out yesterday, as a matter of fact, at a beach we've sort of identified, and we're pounding around for jewelry. In the summer, we'll probably open it up a little bit more to see what we can find as far as Civil War relics in the water. I'm still getting my feet wet, literally and figuratively, on Civil War sites. in the water. And in Virginia, if you hunt tidal waters, you have to have a permit issued by the Virginia Marine Resources Commission. It costs you $25, and you can renew it annually at no charge. But if you're in tidal waters of Virginia, you must have that permit.
Good piece of information. Yeah, now by tidal water, excuse me.
By tidal waters, I mean the waters that go up to the fall line in the rivers like the James and the York and the Potomac. Anywhere where the water actually rises and falls as part of a tide. Once you get beyond that, the Commonwealth of Virginia doesn't have jurisdiction. So lakes, you're open. Rivers is a little bit different in Virginia because we're under laws that go back to 1700s times, and really property owners own the rivers in Virginia, not the state.
Wow. That's not the way it is here in Kentucky.
Yeah, well, I don't remember what the name of the laws are, but, Kentucky's a Commonwealth, I believe, as is Virginia. But most of the river bottoms and the rivers themselves, there's a distinct line in the river, but the property owner on the north side owns one part, and the property owner on the south owns the other, and the state doesn't own any of those.
I've always been
my understanding.
Okay. I've always been personally a little bit fascinated by Chesapeake Bay. Have you ever hunted the beaches on the bay?
So I live near a town called Hampton. There's a fairly old beach there, relatively old. It's called Buckrow Beach. It had a resort area and stuff like that going back to at least the 20s. On the Norfolk side, that's more toward Virginia Beach, there's a place called Ocean View that also had a resort area on the beach. I've hunted both of those beaches. We hunt them pretty extensively in the summer, so some in the winter, but it just seems to dry up a bit in the winter. Also, in my area, believe it or not, you can hunt Yorktown Beach. I remember, I got into Yorktown Beach once during a storm, a northeaster, and pulled out I think it was a 1795, 1796 large scent. The northeaster had pulled a lot of sand down to the rock level, and we were hunting at night. It was raining, but we got into a couple of good spots. So I've hunted some of the beaches around the Chesapeake Bay. There's a lot more I need to or want to get into. Yeah.
Well, that 1795 flowing hair would be, I don't know what kind of condition yours was in, but I know some
Terrible.
guys. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Some guys got into one at a ghost town site here in Kentucky, south of me, just a few years ago, and it appraised at like $6,000.
Yeah. Well, this one had been in the York River for 200 plus years.
Yeah.
And it showed every bit of it. I could barely pull a date. I'm not sure I was able to pull a date, but I could tell by the configuration of the back and the front basically what it was.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Two things that I want to get back to. We want to go back to the camp hunting now.
Dorian, real quick, if it's
ahead,
okay, now might
there.
be a good time. Can you tell us more about some of the detectors? I don't think we got into the current detectors, did we? Or did I miss that?
We're working our way We're working our way in that direction.
We've got a question from one of the listeners about what you use on the beach, so that's all right. We can wait.
No, it's okay. Cori,
I can address it. It's not a problem. So I've been through a lot of detectors, but what I use today is an XP DAS with an X35 coil for land, and I basically got my unit from an outfit called Cold Harbor Detectors in Richmond, and the guys in this area have a couple of programs that seem to do very well in the soil and the conditions we're in. So I have my dais configured. We don't use the factory settings. We use some specialized programs for the land hunting. For water hunting, I just recently got a MindLab Equinox 800, and I use Grey Ghost, I think it's Grey Ghost amphibian headphones. And for me, that's a dynamite machine. It's really stable in the water. I get good depth. I'm able to pinpoint pretty well. It knocks down to a pretty small package. So when I travel, when I go to Caribbean islands or whatever, I pack my detector in a bag that I carry on the airplane, and I've never had any problems going out of the country. I've only had one problem in Barbados coming back. So, but I would really like that Equinox 800. There's other. I got a Nokia because the price point is really good. It's a waterproof machine, but I know absolutely nothing about it. I was in the water with it yesterday just because my battery went on my Equinox, but I'm coming up to speed on that one. But those are my primary machines right now.
When you say the Nocta, you're talking Nocta Macro Simplex, the new Simplex?
Correct.
Okay. I've got one. I have not used it at the beach, and I don't think anything's going to beat what I'm hearing about the 800. But the Simplex, I'll tell you what, that is a heck of a machine for the money. It really is. It is a great detector.
I agree. I mean, I think I paid $340, $350, and I don't know anywhere where you're going to get a machine that will go into salt water and not have an irritation problem for that kind of price point. I mean, it's just a phenomenal price point. It's supposed to be really good in the land too, but I love my dais. It weighs all of 2.5 pounds.
Right.
It goes deep, and it's really good in metal, in iron.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We've got Jeff and Katie Erie listening, and when I was in Ohio, I didn't for long, but Jeff's got an ORX, and boy, is that thing light! Like it just feels like you're holding nothing. And we were metal detecting in a field with a lot of iron, and what I find with digital detectors and heavy iron is they really get tripped up a lot. They will properly identify most iron, but it'll trip up enough that you got to stop and, swing over it a few times and before it determines all this is just iron. The ORX, I got to say, was one of the best digital detectors I've ever used in heavy iron like that. Very impressive.
Well, yeah, I don't know anything about the ORX specifically, but it's made by the same people as Deus,
Mm-hmm.
I believe, right?
Yes,
so,
sir.
With the Deus, the guy I'm hunting with now, he's a big house site hunter and has been for 20 years with various machines, but we use a certain program. He just kicks my butt in house sites, but the machine will hear non-ferrous objects sitting in or under iron. Now, it's not going to do so well if you have like an axe head sitting under a mini ball or a button, but you might just get a tweak or a screech. We don't usually use the numbers so much when we're in iron. We go more by what we hear through the headset. And you may just hear a short screech or a little pinpoint of a screech or just some faint signal, and that's what you'll chase. He digs a lot of iron. I dig a fair amount of iron. So we still dig iron even with the machines as sophisticated as they are. And so you really can't help it in a lot of these house sites. They just have so much iron in them.
Hey, Cori, would you mind commenting on the potential of these old house sites, especially in a heavily worked area like Virginia, in regards to finding Civil War artifacts?
Okay, so what my partner has basically discovered, we work maybe 4 or 5 counties in the greater area from Richmond to Williamsburg, I'll say. And in most of those counties, what they found, I'm new at the house site thing, so I've only been at it maybe a year. But what they found over time is a good many of the house sites appear to have sent some mail off to the Civil War, some Confederate mail off to the Civil War, whether it was a son or a father or whatever. They came back from the Civil War, they brought their uniform with them, and they wore their uniform till it literally fell apart. So they used it in the field plowing, they'd use it tilling, they'd wear it all the time. And what we end up finding is 1 or 2 or 3 of these buttons in a house site that fell off that uniform. That's part of what we find there. And then additionally, depending on the house site, like let's take a doctor's house, for instance. A doctor was a pretty rare commodity in the Civil War, and both sides would probably know if there was a doctor in the area. In our area, there was lots of Union cavalry operating, lots of Confederate cavalry operating. So those guys may pull up a doctor's house and looking for a meal or looking to take a horse or whatever. Good chance they camped overnight. They may have lost a button or 2 there. Typically, when you detect a house site, you're not going to find 25 buttons. Unless it's a colonial house site, you're not going to find 25 Confederate buttons. You'll find them 1 or 2 or 3 at a time. They may be the same type, or you may find a block I, you may find a VMI, you may find a Virginia. It just depends. And so the house sites had 2 things. They either sent a soldier off to war who came back and lost buttons off their uniform, or some of the house sites were actually used for campgrounds, and you'll find a little bit more stuff there. Some of it's just right around the house site. Some of it's a little farther out.
Okay. Mike, you got anything else you want to ask?
No, but that's really interesting. Do you guys find, I mean, overall, so it sounds like you're pulling almost always 1 or 2, 3 finds from those sites related to the Civil War.
So I told you my partner kicks my butt. We spend a fair amount of time in the woods. We use old maps and find old roads. We'll follow the old road or near the old road. So let me back up a little bit. I'm not going to give the name of the guy who made the maps, but there's a series of old maps. If you do some research, you can find them. They were made for a number of the counties in Virginia. And on those maps, it showed roads and it showed house sites. So I have the maps for my area. I've taken the map and I've transposed the roads and the house sites onto modern day topographic maps. And so I highlight the present day, the Civil War roads on a current modern topographic map, and then I lay in the house sites there as best I can. I'll try and, if there's a scale on the old map, I'll use that. If there isn't a scale, I'll try and make one using known sites on that old map that correspond with the current topo map. And then I use some engineer scales and a compass and dividers and that kind of stuff, and just sort of graph them in. And then I'll from the topo map, I can develop coordinates and punch them in my GPS machine, and we can go off and go stumble through the woods and see if we can find them. But so in these old maps, not all the house sites are marked on the map. So you may have 3 house sites shown in a row along a road and say they're a quarter mile apart each. Then if you keep on going, you may find an additional one that's not even marked, and it could be period. It could be a colonial house site. In my area, you can find some really old stuff hanging out in the woods that's never marked. I'll give you another, for instance. When I lived in Loudoun County, there was a land surveyor in 1856. His name was Yardley Taylor. He drew up a pretty good map of Loudoun County, and on it he marked all the roads, the period roads of the time, and he marked house sites on there. Well, you go through that map and you go through the county, and you take you can see a house site that you know is period, and it's not marked on that map. So I think what I'd understood is people would pay him a nickel or 10 cents or something to locate their house on his map. So that may or may not be correct, but my point is, just because there were 5,000 houses in Loudoun County and I'm pulling a number out of my ass, 5,000 houses in Loudoun County in 1856, it doesn't mean Yardley Taylor put 5,000 houses on the map. So we find surprises out there in the woods. But if you work along old roads, if you look for water sources, if you look for high ground, water near a road, you stand a good chance of finding either a camp or an old house site. We've been in areas, though, we've been in areas last couple of weeks that were really low, mushy, swampy ground, and we found 3 or 4 house sites there. So sometimes you just don't know, and you got to wonder what the heck's going through these people's mind. But maybe that's the only land they could afford.
Good point. Cori, one of the things it's kind of hard to get through to the newbies, the rookies, as it were, is that there's a tendency of human nature that guys would, and gals would rather spend an entire day on a site that's been worked hundreds of times, like say, for example, if you're hunting Civil War artifacts, and then dig a couple of mini balls and call that a wonderful day, instead of researching, finding a campsite referenced in a diary or journal or in the official records or something, and then saying, okay, that campsite existed. I know that. I have that fact to start with. Now I've got to find it. If it hasn't been found, I want to ask the question, why hasn't it been found? And once I've got an idea why it's not been found, like, for example, it's not where that the record said it was because the guy had the wrong creek or wrong river name or something. So, Cori, it seems like, how do we really get across a message to the newer people that if you want to do great things, make great finds, that you have to be willing to go out and risk a day where you find nothing. You might have to risk 7 or 8 or 10 of them before you find that unworked camp. Do you agree with me on that, or do you have a different view on that?
Well, I certainly agree with you, Dorian. And I guess to me, if you're really serious about being at least a successful or somewhat successful relic hunter, to me, there's probably a couple of components to that. There's one, you got to really like history. 2, you got to be willing to pound the books and do some research. 3, you got to be willing to knock on some doors and get permissions. And 4, you got to be willing to do the legwork and the grunt work in the field. Not all of these sites are going to be, you pull up to the front yard and you walk 3 feet, you turn on your machine and there's a U.S. belt buckle. I mean, that happens, but it's not the norm. it's just like anything else. You got to be willing to put in the time. These days, I'll say I rarely get skunked, but there's a lot of days that I may just bring in a random bullet or button or maybe an Indian head penny or whatever. I mean, my partner and I spend a lot of time walking through woods, and we typically do hit 2 to 3 house sites in the course of a day, just walking through the woods. Some we know about, some we don't. But you got to be, and I'll be the first to say that is not for most people. I'm a member of a club out of Richmond. A number of these guys have been hunting with my partner. He runs their ass off. He runs my ass off in the woods. And they don't want to go out and work that hard. Okay, so I understand that. So you just got to get a little smarter, find out, do the diary research, do whatever research you can to find a potential area for a camp. In Williamsburg, I have College of William and Mary as a resource. It's got the swim library. It's got a rare book collection there. I also have the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. Colonial Williamsburg Foundation actually has a library, and they'll let the general public in there. And there are some amazing maps in that library, free. And I mean, not everybody has access to the resources I have, but I've spent a good amount of time up in 2 libraries in Richmond, the Library of Virginia and the Virginia Historical Society Library. Both those libraries have a number of diary accounts and stuff like that. So my point is, not everybody is going to have the resources I have, but most everybody should have access to some library near you. Use the resource librarian. And if they don't have the book you want, there's a wonderful thing called interlibrary loan. You find a book you want to at least look at, maybe. So here's an expensive research book. My Bible for the Civil War is the official military atlas of the Civil War.
Yeah.
It probably costs you at least $50, maybe $100 or more for an older one. I think Barnes and Noble did a reprint in 2005, somewhere in there, but they're at least $50. So that's got maps and locations of sites for any state east of, say, Missouri, that troops were in, camps, whatever. It's a literal gold mine of information. Okay, so you may not be able to buy that book, but you can go to your librarian, put in a request for that book through your librarian, or even on site, interlibrary loan. You can get that book shipped to you for $2 or $3, and you get to look at it for 2, 3, 4 weeks, and you can decide whether you want to buy it or not.
Tell them how big that book is, Cori.
That book probably weighs 8 or 10 pounds, and it's probably 16 inches tall and maybe 12 or 13 inches wide. It's a hoss.
Yeah,
but it's a great book.
That's a great.
I love books.
Yeah, it's a great recommendation, Cori. If I can add just a little bit to it, I just bought one on eBay for $25 free shipping, and it was 1981. Yeah, it was 1981, and when I got it, it was like a brand new book. It was absolutely immaculate. I'm thrilled.
I discovered my first. I told you I grew up in Newport News. I lived near a world-class maritime museum called the Mariners Museum. That museum had a library, and I happened to be in there when I was a teenager, and I came across that book. What it was doing in a maritime library, I don't know, but it was a wonderful find, and I spent a lot of time in there with that book. Another resource I really, really like. like I said, I love books. I probably have 350 to 400 Civil War books. Can't say I've read them all, but I have them. There's a website called bookfinder.com. Better than Amazon, better than any website you know. If you want to buy even a new book, used book, some obscure book, go out to bookfinder.com and do a search on it. It pulls in books from Amazon, from eBay, from a bazillion mom and pop booksellers. And if you're, let's say you're in Easton, Maryland, and you want to research old Eastern Shore homes, type in old Eastern Shore homes on Bookfinder and see what pops up. There may be a book that has that title or similar title, and you can go buy it for maybe $8. It's a wonderful resource.
I think so too. I really appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
Oh, it's a gold mine. I have an interest in a little bit more heavy duty treasure hunting and some of that kind of stuff, and I look for some obscure information, and a lot of time I can find it out there. Interlibrary loan, if you have an obscure book. I mean, I've had books loaned to me from like the California State Library in Fresno, and it just cost me $2 or $3 through interlibrary loan. Two really great resources.
Absolutely.
You could get the official military atlas of the Civil War, and for the rest of your life, you'd have a bazillion sites to go research.
Yeah.
Now, it may not work so well if you're in Wisconsin or Michigan. You may have to go other means, but if you're south of the Mason-Dixon line and out Kentucky way, Missouri, there's a lot of information in there.
Okay. Let me pose a question to you. I think you might have to think a little bit on this one, but we have a number of members in our Civil War group, plus members in the All Metal Mode group that live in states, Wisconsin, Michigan, way out in Illinois. I say way out, in reference to the center of the Civil War activity. And the people there would like to hunt Civil War, but they can't afford to drive. They don't have the time. I don't want to say they can't afford so much. They don't have the time with their busy schedules to drive to Virginia or South Carolina or North Carolina, where there's just so many Civil War sites. If you found yourself, Cori, by circumstances, living in the middle of Indiana or Wisconsin or Michigan, and you were somewhat limited in your ability to travel, let's say you had to hunt sites within 100 miles of home, what would you do to hunt Civil War or find Civil War artifacts in those states?
Okay. What I would probably do is within that 50 or 100 mile radius, I would find out whatever towns there are there. I'd go to the librarian. I'd go to the library. I'd talk to the reference librarian and see what, if any, information he or she knew about that area. I would probably concentrate on trying to find out militia units that were formed, because most every county, particularly in the north, put up a unit or so of militia who ended up being pulled into the regular army, or they volunteered and got sucked into the regular army. And all those militia units, they had training grounds. You may not find a lot of stuff. It may be northern stuff, but if you get into militia camp, an early war militia camp, you can find some really unusual buttons. So if it was me, I would concentrate on trying to identify where militia units were formed, where they trained. Another thing you might look at is where prisoner of war camps were.
Good.
There were some pretty big ones in the north. I think Elmira, New York, had a huge POW camp with Confederate soldiers. I'm aware of a Camp Chase in Illinois. There was a big Union camp. I think that's probably mostly been taken out by development. But, you just need a half acre or an acre of the right ground, and you can have yourself a good day or two or three or four.
That's right. And a lot of times, as I mentioned in the past, while we're talking on the subject, I'll just review it. We want to focus on old fairgrounds, because the fairgrounds in those little towns and counties today may not be the fairgrounds that were being used during the Civil War. We have that case right around here. Cori, there's about 15 miles from me. It looks like just a bunch of pasture that's been pasture forever, and a fellow that specializes in researching old fairgrounds took me out and showed it to me, and said this was a big fairground and the Midway was over here, type thing, and they had all these buildings one time. You'd have never known it. Absolutely never known it. But
that's a really...
Go ahead. No, it's all right.
So fairgrounds is a really great point. So in the South, most of the major cities, I know Virginia a little better than the other states. So like Richmond and Lynchburg, they had fairgrounds, generally a little bit out of town. Out of town then would probably still be in the middle of town today. But those fairgrounds were used as camps by the Confederate Army. Just about every fairground in the state of Virginia was used as a camping area or a training area. So I would think, I'm going to take a leap of faith here and say I'd look for the same thing up north. That may be where your militia groups organized and camped.
Yeah, John Hunt Morgan was a big deal here in Kentucky. He raided through here several times. And not too many miles from me, a little west of Maysville, Kentucky, near a little town of Germantown, Kentucky. There was no fairgrounds, and Morgan was in the area, and he captured the city of Augusta, Kentucky, right on the Ohio River. Rather, Morgan's men did. He wasn't with them. And they held it, and looted it and this type of thing for a day or so, and then they retreated. So this colonel from a camp in Maysville, he rallied the Ohio militia, got him across the river, and he had some troops, and they went after Morgan. And the record said they marched to this old fairground, and they assembled there. All the units met there, and then they went after him, as one force. And they actually caught up with him, but through a fluke, which I wrote about in one of my books, all of the rebels escaped. Anyway, my point was that a fellow I knew told me, he said the fairground that's there now is not the one that was there during the Civil War. So he took me and he showed me the fairground, and it was a hay pasture, not a trace of a building on it. The guy had some four-board white fence with a gate, at the entrance. I walked over and leaned on the four-board fence and looked over. Get this, Cori. I looked over the fence, and I noticed that a weed killer had been sprayed along the bottom of the fence and around the posts, and so there was bare dirt. And I looked straight down where I leaned over the fence, and there is a beautiful Eagle C button with about 98% of the gold gilt on it, right on top of the ground, staring at me.
I hope you got permission to detect that fairground or hay pasture.
We did, and we got into seeded and barber coins out there, but that's another story. I won't take up our time. But yeah, I just looked right down, and I thought, wow, instant proof that they were here, just like the records say.
Yep.
So fairgrounds are good.
Yep.
And by the way, Mike, we dropped the ball in that research program. Cori really brought up a very important point when he told about the interlibrary loan. We forgot to mention that.
Right. Well, we're not perfect. We make mistakes.
Speak for yourself, buddy. Yeah. I'm kidding.
Right. I'll take it. Yeah, it's me. I'm all right with that.
Oh,
that was funny. Hey,
don't take that crap from Dorian, Mike.
Well, I mean, he sure knows a lot more than me, and so I do. He's smart. He's got some good. He's given me a lot of good advice. Matter of fact, I tell a story. The very first time we talked, he gave me 3 really good ideas of things that I had never thought of, and I just thought, wow, that's incredible. But I had a question. I mean, I think we're all in agreement that if you really, especially in this day and age, it seems like, boy, the hobby has really exploded, and the internet offers so much access to everything. But I agree 100%. Libraries and that is really where it's at. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's not out on the internet. Do you have any stories of anything, any sites that you found and you found them, pretty much untouched or completely untouched because of going above and beyond what most do on research?
I won't say I get into too many virgin sites, but I'm going to twist it around a little bit. I'm not going to name the counties. I'll let people go look, or maybe their county has the same thing. But when I was doing I was doing research on old houses. I'm looking for a specific thing. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I'm looking for a specific thing, and you need to get into old pre-1800s house sites to do it. So I was in a county library, and I talked to the librarian and told him sort of the basics of what I was after. And this librarian said, well, let me show you what we have here. And what they had there was a 3-ring binder, and in it, the county had commissioned a company to do a survey on all the old houses in that county. Old houses typically being pre-1865 and before. Okay. And so they're all laid out in this 3-ring binder. And what's even better is they were all laid, each house was laid out on a topographic map section. So you have 50 house sites. Behind each house site is some documentation of what went on there. And then there's X marks the spot on a map. So I got the topographic maps for these areas. I used their book, transposed the sites from their topo maps onto my maps, and it wasn't instant, but all of a sudden I have 35 to 50 sites to go look at. Unfortunately, where I am now, most of them are a little farther than I'm willing to go take a ride. But that kind of stuff exists. People have done a lot of the research for you sometimes. But to get back to the basic question, I can't say I haven't had the feeling that I've been in but 1 or 2 virgin sites. I was in a virgin house site with my partner back this winter. But I mean, that house site was all of, 40 feet by 20 feet wide. Again, he kicked my butt. He pulled a bunch of not Indian heads. He must have pulled out 3 or 4 seated half dimes out of there. I got a large sand and a few other things, and he got some buttons too. But he really knows his machine. He really knows how to work in iron, and he's a digging machine. I mean, he'll dig 5 holes for every one I dig.
Hey, Cori, just out of curiosity, what kind of a detector is he using?
We're both using XP DAS.
Okay.
He just knows his machine a lot better than I know mine.
Gotcha. And that's Mike, that leads to another question we could ask Cori about. Cori, we just want to get your amen on this, but no matter how many years, yeah, I'm just going to try to get your amen on this statement. That no matter how many years experience you've had, how many thousands of hours on detectors, each time you get a new machine, you've got to pay your dues on it. You've got to put in the hours on it, or it's not going to. If it's a better machine, you're not going to get the full potential unless you do that.
I got to agree with that, Dorian. I'm still learning the DAS. So we use 2 programs, basically. One, the guy who developed it called it Deep. The other is called Sifter. So Deep does just that. It goes deep on the DAS, but it's sort of you have to go pretty slow on there because the response time's not that fast. But it doesn't sort. If you have a mini ball sitting in a bunch of square nails, it may not separate that out so well. With the Sifter program, you knock out a lot of at least your smaller iron. If you get a big iron hinge or a horseshoe or any iron ring, just gives a good signal. And if that's tied in with a button or something, you probably won't hear the button. But the point is, in that Sifter program, you can sort through iron a lot better than the Deep program. The Sifter program is a faster response program. It doesn't go quite as deep as Deep program, but for the sites we're in, generally you're digging stuff 6 to 8 inches max. So you don't really need a Deep program. The Deep program is really better out in plowed fields where things may be 12, 14, 16 inches deep, and they're a little bit more unique. I mean, they're not necessarily tied in with iron as much as a house site. A house site, you just get everything concentrated in a relatively small area. I mean, the house basically fell in. If it's a Civil War period house, there were hinges, there were nails, there's all that crap, and it fell into one small area. If you're in a colonial house, not so much iron in that area.
Cori, did you ever work the crawl space of one of those old houses or even a cellar space?
I have not. The house sites we find are generally the houses are no longer existing. So that comes to another point. If you're doing your research and you have the option of going to a house site, the house is no longer standing, or a house that is standing, I would opt for the house that's no longer standing just by virtue of the fact nobody sees it. And less people probably know about it unless they've done some research. So your chances of finding, I'll say, a virgin or at least relatively untouched site are better if the house is no longer there. I mean, I've hunted plenty of old houses 1700s houses where I knock on the door, and sometimes you have a good day, sometimes you don't. But if you want a site that it has the potential to be virgin, you don't want a building standing there.
One of the things that you run into when you're house site hunting in fields is that a lot of the house sites had a partial or on a rare occasion, even a full basement if they were, substantial farmers and had the money to build that
Yep.
kind of thing. And once the house is gone, the modern farmers will pay to have those holes bulldozed in, and so they push a lot of the dirt with the coins and things that was immediately around the house. They end up pushing it into the basement hole. Excuse me. And now a lot of good stuff is down there 6 feet below the ground. And
yeah, well, honestly, I haven't been that industrious to go dig those guys out. I mean, we hunt mostly woods, and the main reason we hunt mostly wood. Well, there's two reasons. You can hunt woods year round. And really, my partner is after Confederate buttons, and if the occasional buckle or whatever shows up, he's not going to turn it down. But he really likes Confederate buttons. But buttons typically come out better in a woods environment than a farm field. The farm field has had boatloads of fertilizer and chemicals and all sorts of junk put on it, and it's really rare that you find a button with a decent amount of gilt in a field. Now, I haven't found a huge amount of buttons with a lot of gilt in the woods, but he has. And I was one of the sites we were out in November, December. He dug a beautiful VMI cadet button, probably had coat size, probably had 80% gilt on it. Just awesome. And I probably missed it by 3 or 4 feet, or maybe I even went over it. I may have gone over and it was in iron. I didn't hear it. But the point is, a lot of the buttons and finds come out of the woods in really good shape. In the Williamsburg area where I am, a lot of the fields are sandy soil, so the buttons can still come out in pretty good shape. Let's see, when was it? Probably about a year ago, last spring, last fall. I don't remember which. I got permission to hunt a field locally, pretty big field, and in the course of this wasn't the field. I got my sites mixed up. I got permission to hunt a site near a battle, near a camp. Never been in the area before. Property owner. So went in. The first signal I got was a button, and it was down 3 or 4 inches. Pulled it out over, started cleaning it off, and I wasn't quite sure what I was looking at, but it turned out I was looking at a pelican. And this pelican was sitting in a field of about 80% gilt. And I mean, it's just a beautiful button, and it was just 2 or 3 inches below the surface, right in somebody's backyard, literally. But the point is, the soil in Williamsburg is sandy, so it drains well, so you can get buttons in the fields that are in pretty good shape. And the brass comes out with a beautiful green patina, old colonial spectacle buttons or knee buckles or stuff like that comes out with a real nice green patina. If you're into green, I happen to like it. Some people may not.
Huh. The pelican, was that a Louisiana state seal?
Indeed, it was.
Yes. Oh, great! I found one at Port Hudson. I was holding it gently between my thumb and forefinger, admiring it, and just couldn't believe I'd actually found one. And it crumbled to about 60 little tiny pieces right in front of my eyes.
Yeah, that's a definite heartbreaker. I mean, the next county over, Charles City County, got permission to hunt a site out there. Turns out it looks like it's a Union picket camp. It was the far edges of a large Union encampment. Only one other guy got in there before me. And Mike, this was not any specific research. I just started guesstimating where I thought troops might be and knocking on doors. And I got lucky on this one.
Wow.
The guy let me detect. The previous guy who had been there, I don't know what he had in his mind or whatever, but I guess he wasn't finding what he wanted to find. Anyhow, I took it slow. I was using a GPX 4800 at the time, so this is maybe 2 years ago. And I found a boatload of 69s, some coins. I'm still in there. In fact, I've been meaning to get back. I haven't. I've probably pulled, I don't know, 80 to 169 caliber bullets out of there. Some 38s, and they're scattered over a fairly wide area. He's got a 5-acre piece of property. I'd say about half of the property appears to have relics on it. I did pull one. I pulled one breastplate out of there. And the site still has potential. So,
wow,
that was just one I happened to luck into. I was the second guy there. I spent a lot of time researching. I was looking for, 10 years ago, I was looking for Confederate camps down in this area. I was living in Northern Virginia at the time, looking for Confederate camps down here. When I'd visit my folks, I'd take a day of the weekend, go out and dig. So I researched one, found a location on the south side of the James, got a pretty good idea where it was, knocked on the property owner's door, talked to him, and said, yeah, I think there's a Confederate camp in my back 100 acres or whatever. He had a pretty big property. But, some other guy's been out there. You're welcome to go out there, but somebody was out there before you. Well, indeed, he had a Confederate winter camp in that back 100 acres. I was the second guy there. My best find there was a Confederate clip corner buckle, but the guy before me got several Virginia breastplates and buttons and stuff. I have no idea what he found. He hoovered the area pretty well. So I was the second guy in on that one, and it was pretty well cleaned.
Cori,
You just never know.
Was it far enough back that maybe the newer detectors could go a little deeper out there?
Well, we were using Nautilus DMC2Bs at the time. They're pretty deep detectors, and it's a sandy soil, no mineralization or anything. I mean, it's possible. I don't know if I'll be able to get back there at this point. The property owner passed away, but we did get out there one winter when the property had been deep plowed, and by deep plowed I mean probably 14 to 16 inches deep.
Wow!
And you could actually see the ash from the huts. These soldiers were set up in huts. And you could see the ash from each of the huts. There was a line of, 5 or 6 huts, then it turned the corner, and there were 3 or 4 more.
Wow.
We tried digging a couple of them out. I found a bayonet in one, but, I mean, those Confederate soldiers were either naked or the guy before us got most of the stuff. but it was really cool.
Oh, man.
It was really cool to see the hut line there. And I ended up marking it. I put a bunch of beer cans flattened aluminum cans down about 12 inches so I could get back there at some point in time if I chose to. But
well, now that's a great tip. I mean, that right there is something I hadn't thought about, but that's good, Cori. Marking a site, so, for going back. That's something we've never discussed.
Now, did you? Yeah,
Well,
me too. I've never even thought of that. My question though is, did you drink those beers first to empty them?
Don't get personal, Mike. Come on, give the guy a break.
I'm not sure what you're talking about. I missed something.
I was just saying, what a great tip about marking your sites with
the
know,
the beard. No, actually, I carry. I drank them.
He said,
I drink. I carry a bunch of. I carry maybe 10 or 12 smashed beer cans around in my vehicle at any time, just in case I need to mark something out in the field. It's just a habit I got into. I mean, I typically take a GPS machine with me so I can get reasonably close, but
you know what I like about it?
Nice
Corey, what I like is that somebody coming along behind you and digging one up would never think of it as a deliberate marker. They just say, "Oh man, look at this! I got a beer can a foot deep here."
Right. Well, hopefully they put it back in the same hole and don't throw it.
Yeah, there you go. That's good. Yeah. Yeah.
How many flattened beer cans have you dug, Dorian? Now I'm wondering if I was digging up a marker. Did I miss something?
I'll tell you what. I've gotten on Civil War sites and old field hospital sites and thinking, oh yeah, this is going to be good, because a flattened beer can. My experience has been, at least on my Garrett AT Pro and my Fishers that I had before that, they all sound like a Civil War brass belt plate.
Indeed.
And you can't pass the signal up, but when you're out, digging, I'll give you an example. Fellow I hunt with from time to time at Perryville. Recently, we got permission from a guy who lived in a house that dated back to 1780, said it'd never been hunted, and we thought, oh, this is going to be real good. We're going to have, possibly not only choice coins, but some Civil War artifacts, because it's right in the general area of Perryville. So we go out to this house, and the guy welcomes us with open arms, and you all just hunt anywhere you want, blah, blah, blah. And we're thinking, oh, this is going to be great. Well, it turns out the guy has been living in the house for, 15, 20 years, and he's a Mountain Dew addict. And I mean an addict. The guy was drinking 12 to 24 a day. And I don't know why he was still alive, because those Mountain Dews have 22 teaspoons of sugar in them. You talk about assaulting your liver and building your own diabetes, boy. So we got out in that yard, and I kid you not, front and back, we couldn't go 3 feet without digging a flattened Mountain Dew can. I left that site.
Yeah.
I left that site, Corey, with a burning hatred for Mountain Dew.
I bet you probably had a burning hatred for aluminum in general, but
we did.
You got to look at the bright side, Dorian. You collect the cans, and at least you can recycle them for a penny or two each. So.
Well, here's the problem, Corey. He had also mowed his cans. He just threw them out in the yard, and he mowed them. And in between the whole cans was like wall-to-wall can slaw.
Oh, man.
And we never could get past that first 2 or 3 inches of soil to get to any old coins that were under it. If it'd been iron, oh yeah, we'd have got some coins. We'd have been glad.
Well,
excuse me, go ahead.
I'm just, we were in a, this isn't an old site, but it's a camp, and it just has a boatload of coins in it. I was out there years and years ago with, I don't know what machine it was, but some analog machine. And I took, we spent maybe a half hour out there, and there were so many pull tabs. You just didn't want to dig them all. So we left. So fast forward to about a month or two ago, went back to the same camp years and years later and asked the director there if I could get permission to detect. She said, fine, as long as it's the off season, we don't have anything going on. So we go out there, and she said somebody else had been ahead of us. So we go out there, my partner and I, and sure enough, there's a boatload of pull tabs. But with my desk, those pull tabs are in a certain range. And I know coins on my desk. So a quarter on the desk is 94, 95, I think. A dime just a little bit under that. A nickel's like 60, I think. And the pennies I didn't really care about, so I didn't worry about them. But the point is, I could go right through all those pull tabs and pick out quarters. And we pulled a boatload of quarters out of there, and we were able to pull some silver out of there. So I don't know how close that site is, but if your machine has a digital readout and it's sharp, you might be able to go back to a site and go back over it, even if it has a bunch of aluminum crap in it, because aluminum is typically going to ring in a certain digital range on any given machine. But a quarter, I think generally a quarter and a dime will ring differently. A nickel may ring in the aluminum range. I don't know. But silver should.
On the AT Pro, the problem we had was the can slaw was in so many different sizes, so many, pieces of the cans that they gave readings that covered the whole range of coins. And we thought, we actually said, okay, we're going to grit our teeth and we're going to dig out this junk and get to the coins. And we picked a couple of small areas, about 30 feet square. And we both tried to do that. He was using a Deus, by the way, and I was using the AT Pro. And we both tried to do that. And after about, 35, 40 digs in a row of pieces of aluminum, we just looked at each other and said, yeah, let's just forget it. Let's go on to the battlefield. We can't do any worse. And we actually had a pretty good day on the battlefield. And, I got about 20 artifacts that afternoon. So.
Well, good. So just out of curiosity, how much acreage did the guy own? The house guy.
Well, the front and the backyard was probably about 3 total acres.
Okay, and the whole site was strewn with cans, or was it just around the house?
Well, that's the thing. We went all the way out to the gravel road that his driveway came off of, and we were still digging cans, and we were the length of a football field from the house, and we went down the backyard.
You got the sight from hell.
Yeah, we did. It looks so good. I mean, this house would have looked so perfect on the cover of a treasure mag with a guy with standing in front with a metal detector. And
with a 1795 flowing hair stand in his hand, right?
Yeah. Well, it would be blown up in an inset at the bottom of the cover there, where you could really see the details. It looked like that kind of a house, and we went in with high expectations. But anyway, it's when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade, as they say, and so. We spent the morning, gave up on that, wasted half our day, but then we went on to the Perryville battlefield to a permission we had, and we did really good. So we made up for it and went home, happy overall. But I'll never forget, that was the best looking 1700 house site I had ever seen. Yeah. And to walk away empty-handed, it was a personal defeat. I'll admit it stung.
It happens.
I would agree, and I'll say I've found not a number, but I've had a fair number of those kind of circumstances. This site looks perfect, or this area looks perfect for a camp. Absolutely nothing in the camp, nothing in the house site. Where the heck were these people? Or what were they doing? I don't know. I've had skunks in really nice areas, and then you look at a house and it looks like a trash pit. And well, we had a site in Maryland. It was I think the house dated back to the Civil War. It's actually a slave quarters, and from around that area, let's see, there are probably 4 of us involved at the time. I think we got 11 plates out of the whole area, and it just looked like a piece of crap. So, yeah, I didn't find 11 plates. I found maybe 3, but
only 3.
It was well,
no.
Yeah. Well, when you talk, my buddy he went down in the down the creek where 2 creeks met, and in some rocky area, I guess the Union guys decided to camp, and he must have found 5 or 6 plates in there, and he found the top head of a flagstaff. So,
of a what? Oh, flagstaff.
Flagstaff, yeah.
Wow.
So,
I always find the base.
Point is,
go ahead.
My point is, don't. Sight can be deceiving, and don't try and outsmart the relics. The relics are where they are.
Yeah, I think the gold nugget hunters have a similar saying: "Gold is where you find it." Right.
That's right.
I got a
Sometimes I think the relics move.
I've got a quick funny story, and I think it really, kind of finish it off this little story because there's a good message behind it. I got permission for a very early house site in the county I was in. We're talking 1800 something, which was very early for Ohio, and big old 2-story, beautiful, really nice yard. I really didn't know if he would give me permission. Probably on a couple acres in the country, I 2 or 3 acres. I really don't know. Huge yard, huge. And it was all off to the side of it and stuff. And I went out there and I was so excited, and beautiful house. And man, I'm digging old radiator caps and pieces of stainless trim off of cars and, all this weird stuff. And the guy was probably in his 60s. And he come out, "You found anything?" And we'll on the corner of his concrete porch, I'd been stacking stuff, and I said, "Yeah, it's all right there." And he looked down, he kind of laughed. He said, "Yeah, Dad," he said, "when I was, something like when he was a little kid, Dad had that whole area full of cars. It was a junkyard." It just goes, don't ever look at a site and think, I think don't get your hopes up. You just never know. You got to hunt it. Another real quick one, got permission for, in Ohio, Zane's Trail was one of the first trails cut in through Ohio in like the 1780s or something like that. It's been so many years. And on Zane's Trail, through some research, I found where a 3-story tavern right on Zane's Trail, built right around 1800 was. Well, it's still there, and the guy turned it into a house. And I got permission, and boy, am I excited. And is there, huge big yard and stuff. And I bet I pulled, it's been a lot of years, 2 or 3 bucketfuls of trash out of there. And what had happened was, and I can tell you, my father was a builder, and back in the 80s and, up until at least the 90s, and I'm sure out in the country, when they built or remodeled a house, they buried all the trash on site. So one of my first finds was the cleaner and the cleaner and dope for doing pipes, and they tape them together. And I found that taped together, and I just kind of shook my head. But I was bound and determined to pull something out of there. So I kept going back and just pulling bucketfuls of trash out of there, but I never did. Never found anything good. So what I'm getting at is, you just can't look at a site and do that. I think a lot of new people new to the hobby get, really excited by the way a house looks or something, and you just got to move on. You're going to run across those sites that just do not produce. For whatever reason. And I think those are some really good examples.
Yeah, and it's called the law of diminishing returns. You're better off hunting a brand new site that you haven't found yet than you are just to keep pounding a site that has gotten to the point where, what you're finding for the time spent. What are you making, 2 or 3 cents an hour?
Right. Well, I mean, it's not about money, but it sure is about finding something, isn't it? And I think, people new to the hobby, I find often struggle when to give up on a site. And, I tell them, you're surrounded by places, okay, you found a seated dime there and a really cool older button, whatever. I'm just throwing whatever out there. But when's the last time you found something at that site? Go across the street, a mile down the road. There's so much more. At some point, you got to move on, and you need to know when to move on. And you don't ever have to give up on it as you get better equipment, different times of the year, that kind of stuff. But there is a time when it's better to at least put it on the back burner and move on. Find something else.
Amen.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I'll second the amen.
Okay.
Sure.
All right. Where do we want to go from here?
Wherever you want to go, Dorian. I don't know. Did we talk about some of your favorite finds? We haven't gotten to that yet, have we?
No, don't think so.
And we're not talking. We're not asking what's your most valuable find, but what finds do have really good memories attached to them that gives you kind of a warm fuzzy feeling every time you think about finding it.
Okay, well, probably my favorite one it may be one of my most valuable, but it's not because of that. It's just in the context. So I was visiting my parents. I don't remember when it was. It's probably mid-90s. I think I was still using an old white 6dB machine. So this machine, the faster you swung it, the deeper it would go. So I was over at Yorktown scouting around, literally in the town of Yorktown, looking to see if I could find some place to go. And lo and behold, I see this house in the middle of town, and behind the house, there's these big piles of dirt. So I walk over there, and there's these archaeologists hard at work there, excavating an area. And so they were excavating an area behind the house, and then probably 150 feet away from there were some dirt piles that they had left. So I decided, what the heck? I'm not going to ask. I just went over there with my machine and started detecting. Within 2 or 3 minutes, one of the Archies comes over and says, we'd really rather you not go detect in this dirt. We're still looking through it and stuff. But if you'd like, we pulled a couple of piles of topsoil off, and we put it under the bridge. There's a bridge in Yorktown that goes over the York River. It's called the Coleman Bridge. So anyhow, they'd taken a few dump truck loads of dirt and put it under the bridge. And he said, "You're welcome to try that." So I said, "Okay, thank you." So I went over there, and it was sort of late in the day, and I started swinging my machine. And Yorktown was occupied in the Revolutionary War, and then in the Civil War, the Confederates occupied it again and beefed up the earthworks. So you have both Civil War occupancy and Rev War occupancy. So anyhow, I'm searching through this dirt, and lo and behold, I dig up a mini ball. I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. So I started swinging again, and I pull up this button, and I didn't really know what it was. It was a one-piece button. It looked like it had some stuff on there, and so I thought I'll check it out later. So I looked a little bit more in the dirt, and I didn't take the dirt piles apart. I should have. So when I get home, I clean this button. And what is the button? It's a Continental Army button, USA, intertwined in.
Oh yeah.
Almost museum condition. It had the shank. The shank's not quite straight up, but that stuff had come from the topsoil of the site that Archies are digging.
Oh, that's great.
And I found me what I thought was a really cool button, and they'd just given up as, that's topsoil, nothing there. So that's probably my favorite one. The second favorite one is I was living in Loudoun County. This was a couple of years after I'd gotten back into metal detecting. And in Loudoun County, there's a couple of Civil War battles, but the one near me was called the Battle of Ball's Bluff. It was right on the Potomac River, Virginia side of the Potomac River. So the Union occupied the Maryland side. They had a big camp or several camps in the area of a place called Edwards Ferry. So on my side, there was a new subdivision being built, and it was probably about 3/4 of a mile, half to 3/4 of a mile back from the river. So I told my partner, why don't we go run around out there and see if we can find something. And this soil there it's called red rock, and it's definitely red. So it's ironized, mineralized, all that kind of stuff. So we're walking around, swinging our machines. We've been a couple of hours at it and really hadn't found much. So I just gotten a Nautilus machine, and really the Nautilus machine, that isn't the area to use it, but I wanted to try it. So I was out there with my Nautilus. I get a signal. It's a darn solid signal. So I kick away the leaves, and I see a little depression there, like somebody had been digging before and didn't finish the hole. But the signal was so good, I kept digging it. So about, 8 or 10 inches down, I uncover a parrot shell, intact.
Wow.
So I go, whoa, what the heck is this doing there? And so I knew my buddy had never seen a parrot shell, any intact artillery shell. He was pretty much a newbie to the hobby. So I cover the parrot. I put the parrot shell sort of just on the top of the hole, and throw some leaves on it. I said, hey, his name's Scott. I said, Scott, come on over here and see what you find. So I get him to swing his machine, and all of a sudden he gets this big ass signal, and he uncovers the leaves, and there's this parrot shell, and he goes, holy whatever expletives you want to say. So he went off like a wild man. I think he was using MineLab Explorer at the time. I think that existed. So this is, 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and he is running around like a wild man, swinging that machine to beat hell. And he, about an hour in, he gets a really deep signal, and he uncovers a parrot shell.
Oh man!
And it's probably 18 inches deep or so. And then it was getting pretty late, 9, 10 o'clock at night. He uncovers another one. So we finally figured it was getting late. I had to go to work tomorrow. He was working night shift, so he didn't have to work. So he came back to the site. Anyhow, over about 2 weeks, we pulled 12 parrot shells out of that site intact. 11 of them were 10-pounders. One of them was a 20-pounder, and he also got a 10-pound ground burst. So a ground burst is when the shell explodes in the ground, and you are able to. He got everything but the base from that shell. So it was just a fluke. I mean, I don't have any other way to say it. I mean, we just happened to luck into the site at the right time. I took a azimuth reading on the shells in the ground, so basically a compass reading, and laid that back on my topo map so I could figure the direction the shells were fired from. They had come from Edwards Ferry. But, the only thing we found in that area was the parrot shells. We didn't find any shrapnel, no bullets, no buttons, nothing. So
it was an overshoot area. It's the shells were supposed to explode over the troops, and they didn't. They were duds, and they just kept on going.
Yeah, I guess that's possible. It just seemed it was. I don't know. It was maybe 150 by 150 area. It was just such a concentrated area. It seemed like it was more a targeted area, but that's possible.
Hey,
but
Cori, when I was hunting Arkansas battlefields, there was one called Poison Springs, and I kind of got put onto him by a Garrett dealer and his son. The son was Townsend Mosley, had been in the artillery in World War, or rather in the Korean War. And Townie, as we called him, they had the Union wagon train that was attacked at Poison Springs had a battery of James rifles. And so he plotted where the overshoot shells would have landed. And he went about 3/4 of a mile from the battlefield and came to a little area. It was just a natural kind of depression in the middle of the woods on flat ground. And he found 5 complete James shells within a 120-foot circle.
Wow. Okay.
So you see what I mean about an overshoot area?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I thought overshoot. I'm still not totally convinced, but my other explanation was there was the remains of an old road there, and I thought they may have been targeting a wagon train or something. But with no shrapnel, nothing else, no bullets, nothing in the area, your explanation is probably the more correct one. But it was a fun and interesting time, and that's probably my second favorite story.
Let me add a couple of points for the sake of our non-experienced Civil War relic hunters that are listening in. When Cori was talking about a ground burst, those usually occurred, and the pieces stayed often. I dug a 24-pound ball down on Spanish Fort Mobile battlefield. It was 36 inches down, Cori, and all 12 pieces of the shell were within a 3-foot circle in the sandy soil. And the reason why they were so close together, that was not the ground keeping the exploding shell from, having a big impact. It was the fact that the shell had not been loaded with a complete charge of black powder. Mm-hmm. And my point is that's what created most ground bursts. And the pieces stay relatively close together in the ground, which, I actually was able to glue mine back together. I found a piece with a fuse hole in it and left that one unglued, so you could actually look down in the shell and see the inside of it. But I got all 12 pieces of the shell. But the big marker is the fact that you're not getting shrapnel from other exploded shells, and you're not getting any artifacts, fired bullets, or anything. Right.
No, I would agree. There's still a part of me that says it may have been targeted, but why the shells didn't? These were all paper fused shells, so why they didn't explode, I have no idea. I have a theory that maybe it was raining. I didn't look at the weather reports for that time, but maybe it was rain, or maybe they just cut the paper fuses too long and they just didn't explode properly. But
Well, I see
Sidebar
the paper fuse has to be ignited by the flames coming up alongside, right?
Right.
Okay.
That's right.
It is a fact that during the Civil War, the dud rate of shells was about 40%. So, if 40% of a batteries, you guys found, what'd you say, 10 or 11 shells, counting the soft burst?
12.
12?
12 plus the ground burst. Yeah.
Okay. So if that's 40%, what is, let's see.
It's probably around 30.
Yeah.
30 shells would have been fired.
Yeah. So that, like I said, yeah, I'm thinking those are probably shells, the dud shells from a battery of anywhere from 2 to 4 guns. Certainly not a full 8.
Right.
Anyway,
Well,
interesting.
Anyhow,
go ahead.
It was fun. A sidebar on it. One of the shells. So I told you the soil there was this real red rock shale. So one of the shells I dug, it went about 16 inches into this rock, 14 to 16 inches in. And I was able to, the shale was soft enough so I could break it with my shovel. And I was able to pull a section of rock out that you could see the actual groove the shell made in the rock.
Wow.
So I have the shell with the artillery shell groove in it, which I thought was pretty unusual.
Yeah.
To me, it was really cool. I mean,
maybe sometime you could maybe sometime you could post a picture of that on our Civil War page, Cori.
Okay. Yeah.
I think everybody would love seeing that.
Yeah, it's a pretty unusual find. Unfortunately, the rock's so fragile. I've had to glue it back a couple of times because it will just if you touch it the wrong way, it will you'll get a fracture. But I do still have it, and that was one of my for me one of the cool finds.
That's a neat story.
I remember legendary relic hunter Larry Hicklin from Murfreesboro, Tennessee. On the Murfreesboro battlefield, Larry, there's big flat slabs of rock all through the woods, and I'm talking about it could be 8 to 12 inches, 14 inches thick, and it could be like 8 feet long and 6 feet wide or 4 feet wide. They're just all different sizes. Larry, hunting in an area of these slab rocks, found a complete Hotchkiss shell sticking in one of the rocks. It was buried into the rock.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was buried into the rock about 3 or 4 inches. And so he started, when he hunted that area, he would bring a hammer and chisel, and he'd spend 30 minutes hand chiseling a ditch, around the shell. And he said it took him about 2 years, but he finally got he got the shell out in a piece of that big slab rock.
I wouldn't have been that patient.
Yeah, well, like I said, he just work on it a little bit every time he was back there. He said, and but that was, you wouldn't think that a shell could penetrate that far into solid rock without blowing.
Yeah.
But the hard powder and the paper fuses, boy, they went out. The 12-pound paper fused cannonball I found sticking in the river or the creek bank at Robert E. Lee's camp at Mine Run, Cori. It had a wood plug fuse adapter with a paper fuse, and I was able to get the paper fuse out of it and unroll it, and it was from a Richmond newspaper. Huh. How cool is that?
Wow.
That's way cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I could actually see it was right at the top of the paper, and I could see I've forgotten the name of the paper now, but it had the name of the paper and it said Richmond,
It was the National Lampoon, wasn't it?
Yeah, there you go.
That's cool. I can't say I found one of those. I don't know if I'd have the guts to unroll my paper fuse, Dorian.
I hear you.
Probably just let it be.
Well, it was a Confederate, they were a little desperate. You know how it got as the war went on.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. That shell was underwater. The shell was 2 feet underwater, sticking out of the creek bank, and I spotted it walking across a rock dam across the creek. And
Oh, wow. Good
yeah,
eyes.
and the camp right behind me had been hunted to death. There were dig holes everywhere that had not been filled, and I couldn't believe that cannonball had survived all that time and nobody had spotted it. You know, so you never know.
Yeah,
We have a great question
indeed.
for those that haven't found, or haven't hunted Civil War and stuff. How do you know when they're safe? How do you know when they're not going to explode? I mean, obviously solid shot. I mean,
yeah.
Well, I would. I love Civil War artillery. I really haven't gone after it as much as I'd like to, but I would assume any shell that is not solid shot is live, and you need to handle it carefully. Typically, the paper fused shells are not going to cause a problem. They've just been so impregnated with water and stuff that the chances of them going off are very, very slim. On my shells, I happen to have a contact up in Northern Virginia who would defuse the shells. So they would do it one of two ways. They would, I don't know if they had, I never saw the drill set up, but I'm assuming they had some kind of remote drill setup. So you could have them drill through the body of the shell down near the base. It's probably submerged in water. And once you get to the powder chamber, they just flush out the black powder, and you leave your fuse intact. That's really my preferred way because I think it displays better. Or they could go right through the top of the paper fuse and flush it out. The first one I found, my dad was a ex-World War II infantryman, and he was just curious as hell, and he would tackle most anything. So he decides to defuse this 10-pound parrot in the kitchen. So what he did is he got a hand drill and a steel bit and went right through the paper. Fortunately, it was a paper fuse. As soon as he hit the powder chamber, that thing started bubbling and smoking, all sorts of stuff. We thought all hell was going to break loose, but that was just the gases and stuff from the sulfur and the decomposed powder. But I would not advise anybody to do that at home. There's still a couple of guys left, at least a couple in Virginia, that will defuse your shells. If you have, there's basically three types of fuses, I believe. There's 3 or 4. There's the paper fuse we've been talking about. There's a percussion fuse, which basically is supposed to explode on impact. If you find something like that, I would handle that very, very delicately and get somebody that knows what they're doing to defuse the shell. You do not want to have that nose of that shell hit anything. There's also a combination fuse, which is sort of a time fuse and or percussion. It has a timing mechanism and or a percussion mechanism. They're also fairly volatile. And then the fourth one, I guess I'd call it, is what Dorian had mentioned earlier at Tom Dickey's, a water cap fuse. So that is a waterproof fuse that the naval vessels use. And that fuse, if you have that combination, that's also a highly volatile combination. You want to make sure, again, you don't touch that fuse, you don't hit it, you get somebody that knows what they're doing to diffuse it. We had a guy who was supposedly really good on fusing artillery shells. Probably 10 or 15 years ago, guy out of South Richmond, he was working on one of those, and I don't know what got into him, but I think he was using metal on metal. He didn't realize there was a hairline crack in the shell. I think it was a 24 or 32 pounder. It was a pretty good sized shell. So anyhow, he hit that thing the wrong way. Spark went through the shell, exploded, and blew. The neighborhood had a pretty major event, and he lost his life in the thing. So you really want to be careful with artillery shells. I love to dig them, but I will handle them very carefully.
And Cori, let me jump in here a minute, because could be a matter of life and death. And I want to mention, there's a YouTube star. I'm not going to mention him by name. He has a huge following, and he did a video saying that percussion shells are not dangerous and that the black powder won't hardly burn. And he is absolutely wrong. Percussion shells, let me give you an example. In one particular incident during the Civil War, which occurred not too far from where I am right now, a retreating Yankee army was on a very narrow road along the Big Sandy River, and one of the caissons full of projectiles for the James rifles with percussion fuses. And let me say this. You look at the percussion fuse, it has a slot like it's made for a screwdriver, which it is. It's like a piece with a point on it in the center of the fuse, and then it's flat around the edges, and it has a groove on each side of it. And the idea is that when the groove in that little centerpiece is not in line with the grooves on the side, it's in the safe position. They would take, just before they fired it, they would turn the fuse so that the line or the groove in the fuse lined up with the grooves on the adapter part of the fuse around the edges. And then it would explode, supposedly, when it hit the ground. Well, a lot of these didn't. So any shell you find that has a percussion fuse, it is not in the safe position. It's in the explode position. So you don't want to be dropping that shell on its nose. You don't want to hit the nose by accident with a digging shovel. It's a very, very, you've got to treat it like it's a life-threatening piece of ordnance, because it is. But in this particular incident, one of the caissons, the wheel on the river side of this narrow road that was cut through a rocky cliff area, slipped off, and the caisson went mostly over the hill with the left wheel barely on the edge of the road. Well, the soldiers decided not to unload the caisson, but to try to get it back up on the road. So a bunch of them got down and started pushing. And in the process of getting that caisson back up on the road, it jostled the shells inside, which are all in a safe position. One of them exploded, blew the back legs off a mule, injured 4 soldiers. Fortunately, didn't kill anybody. But all those shells, the fuses were in the safe position. And one more thing. That cannonball, Cori, that I found sticking in the creek had been underwater for 160 years. When I got I unloaded it. That was in my foolish days. I did unload the shell going through the nose. And when I broke into the shell chamber thinking it was totally soaked with water, it started bubbling like crazy. It was totally dry inside. The black powder was still dry. Yep. So, don't ever assume that a shell is safe or that you've got the shell figured out, because you just cannot afford to be wrong.
Right. Right. I mean, it doesn't matter if there's 1 in a million chance you don't want to take that chance.
Yeah, no, you don't. And there was one fuse. Thankfully, the only place they're found is in Virginia, and they're very rare. if you dig up a cannonball and it has a brass fuse plug in it, and you see the word Tice engraved in it, Tice, take your shoes off and tiptoe away from the hole. Do not try to take that shell out of the ground because it has a lead acid vial in it. Or excuse me, not a lead acid, but a vial of acid in glass. And if that acid, I don't know how they would survive impact, but some of them did because they have been dug before. And if that little vial of acid breaks from your handling, the shell will blow.
Ugh.
And haven't heard of that one, Dorian.
Yeah, and needless
maybe I didn't want to.
Yeah. Well, needless to say, for those of you out there that might be in other countries or might be wanting to go hunt World War I, World War II, do not, I repeat, do not attempt to take a shell you find out of the ground. Those fuses will kill you. Literally, I saw the other day, they're losing 5,000 to 6,000 people a year from unexploded ordnance over in Europe from World War II still.
Wow. Well, that was crazy.
There were so many millions of artillery shells fired that there's hundreds of thousands of dud shells still in the ground, and they're all dangerous.
Yep. Wow.
All right. I didn't mean to dominate the show here, but I just wanted to say.
Really, that was very important. I'm glad you set it out there, and you put it out there, and it addressed an important question we had. So, no, good job, Dorian.
Yeah, and look, if somebody finds a shell, if you're a beginner and you find a shell, talk to us. Talk to some of us that have been there and done that with shells and things. And, if it can be safely removed and be preserved as an artifact, we'll tell you. And if we think that your life's at risk, we'll tell you that too, because there is no single relic worth losing your life or being maimed for life. You might not get killed. You might get maimed, and that's even worse. So, let's be safe.
Absolutely. Wow. Wow, you kind of make me not want to dig an artillery shell now.
Oh.
Well, just be really careful, Mike. But I will, if you want to preserve the relic, do not call the bomb squad. Do not call the police. I mean, that is instantaneous death of the artifact.
Right.
So, but I mean, in Virginia, we're lucky we have resources that can handle these things outside of DOD or whatever government three-letter acronym you want to use, and you can keep the shell. They'll do it safely. They're experienced, and no harm, no foul. But I don't know what would happen if I found one in Kentucky. I don't know if I could find somebody out in Kentucky who knew how to do shells.
Yes, so, we have somebody, Cori. It turns out he is the greatest relic hunter in Perryville history. His name is Daryl Young, and he has the biggest collection of Perryville artifacts of anybody. And he's unloaded over, I think, 1,000 shells.
Wow!
I watched him.
You got an expert.
Yeah, I watched him. My partner found a 10-pound parrot there, and I didn't know when he took me to visit Daryl. I didn't know that he was going there to get that shell unloaded, so I actually watched him unload the shell. It took him less than 10 minutes. He put the shell underwater, and he had a drill system set up. Knew exactly what he was doing. Never allowed the temperature of the drill bit, to be transferred to the metal of the shell, and so it was a cold bit when it broke into the shell chamber. The hot bit will kill you.
Right. Well, again, folks, do not do this at home.
There you go.
There's a guy, a YouTube video I saw a couple years ago. I wouldn't know how to find it again. He's got a setup. He's got a shed a good distance from his house, and he's got a camera on the cannonball. He's got like a cable running from the drill press up to his back porch, where then he has like, if I remember right, he's got like a barrier he's behind, and he sits there and drills watching it on camera, and he's got water constantly. He doesn't submerge it, but he's got water constantly. I mean, like a high pressure hose, like city water pressure going to town right on where he's drilling the whole time. I thought that was a really neat video and setup to see how he did that.
Yeah, there was used to buy a book from the Naval Ordnance Department, Naval Ordnance Disposal, and they actually showed you how to make the drill press setup that would water cool the drill bit while you were, drilling the shell out. But I'm sure that's not available now. But it was back in the day. Yeah.
Well, I'll go ahead.
Let me throw in one more shell story, Corey. You're going to love this one. Excuse me. Vicksburg got terribly bombarded by the Federal Army. The city got bombarded, the houses, tremendous bombardment during the siege of Vicksburg. So back in the, I think it was the late 80s, this guy had to have a new sewer line or something run in his backyard, and the excavator brought up a 13-inch, 300-pound mortar ball.
Huh.
Well, this guy thought it was just a solid cannonball. And he didn't know it had 40 pounds of black powder in it. So he had built this addition onto this 1800s house that he lived in. It was like a big den with a fireplace at one end. It was attached to the back of the house, and it ran for 30 feet, and it was about 16 feet wide. And then at the far end, towards the back of the backyard, that end was a big stone fireplace. So he set the ball on the hearth beside the fireplace, thinking it was a solid shot. And so it sat there for several years through several winters of fires, no problems. And one night, in a January night, the guy was standing in front of the fireplace. He was the only one in the room. And he was warming his hands over the fire, and that shell exploded.
Oh, wow.
It totally destroyed that 30-foot long by 16-foot room. No walls, no roof left. Only the chimney and the fireplace is left. And the guy is still standing right in front of the fireplace.
That's one lucky dude.
Listen to this. Not a stitch of clothes on, black from powder burns. He has powder burns from head to foot. And not one piece of that 300-pound shell, not one piece of shrapnel hit him. And he was, he had both eardrums punctured. He was deaf, but he survived.
Wow.
But you see,
the last survivor of the Civil War.
There you go. But you see what I mean about you can't afford to make a mistake when it comes to shells.
Indeed. I hope he played the lottery the next day.
There you go.
That sounds like something we would have, when I was a kid, I'd have watched on Bugs Bunny or, Road Runner, something like that, Wow, how lucky. I don't know if I've ever told you this, Dorian. I need to get pictures when I get back home. I'd be curious what it was from. I met a guy in Lancaster, Ohio when I lived there, knew I loved history and talked about it all the time. And he brought me a solid ball. It's pretty small. I mean, it's a little bit bigger than a softball, let's say.
Okay.
And the story is, he gave it to me. He said, "You like history so much." He said, "I've held on to this all these years, but as much as you talk about history," he would go to Virginia. Several summers, he went to Virginia when he was out of school to go stay with his cousins. And one time they were in the woods. I guess it sounds like they owned a bunch of land or had a big woods or something. They seen like a knot on the side of a tree. They happened to be close enough to it, and he said it looked like metal, was just barely sticking out, just a little piece. Well, they spent, a lot of their summer and their free time carving at that tree until they got it out, and it was a cannonball. And I've got that, and he gave that to me, but I don't know if that would have been Civil War or Revolutionary War. I don't know enough about.
Sounds like what do you think, Cori? A 6-pounder?
Well, if it's a little bigger than a softball, it sounds like a 12-pounder to me, Dorian, but I don't know. I guess do you have any? So a 12-pounder is about a little over 4 inches in diameter. That would be a good way to tell it. If it's,
I'm sitting here looking at
it.
I'm sitting here looking at a 12-pounder right now. In fact, I'm going to reach out and touch it here.
So the 12-pounder would be Civil War. 6-pounders were in the Civil War, but that was a prime Rev War ball. I guess it really depends on where it was found. That would probably pretty much answer the question.
Yeah.
Unless it's Yorktown.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
It doesn't sound like it was Yorktown.
I have no idea now where it came from, but
that's too bad. You missed out on a site, Mike.
Right,
wow.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, there could have been more shells in that tree.
Right, or in the area,
or
at least
in the area, right?
Yeah, and by the way, for our listeners, if you want to see something interesting, do a Google search, type in the words war log images or Civil War war log, one word, WARLOG, images, and you will get many, many pictures of trees with cannonballs and shells and things sticking in them from the Civil War.
Wow. Yeah, that's so neat. That's so cool.
Yeah. Tom Dickey had
I wish I had one.
I'll tell you, Cori, Tom Dickey had some awesome war logs. I mean, he had them. He had pieces of trees about 3 or 4 feet long that had 5 or 6 different pieces of shrapnel or whole shell or cannonballs in them, wow. Or canister shots sticking out of them. It made me realize. It made me realize that to be in front of a cannon battery was really a dangerous place to
be. Well, it's dangerous even if you're on the side firing the shells, because a lot of the shells it's called a sabot, actually, SABOT. It's lead, and like the Hotchkiss shells had them, the James shells had them. It's basically wrapped around the base of the shell, and it would fit in the grooves of the cannon, and the rifling would engage the lead and give the artillery shell a spin. So it had a gyroscopic effect. It stabilized the shell and it give it distance. But the bad part was a lot of those sabots came off the shell within 100 yards or a couple of 100 yards of firing, and if you're Union infantry in front of a James battery, you're not so appreciative of them losing their lead sabots right over your head. So those shells were not so popular after all.
Yeah, good
pretty
point.
Quickly, actually.
Yeah,
guys,
yeah.
I gotta tell a story. I'm sorry.
Why?
Well, we're talking. Well, it's way off subject, but you're gonna laugh. It's worth it. So we're talking about shells. You guys are talking about how to, properly handle them and stuff. And at one point, I'm just now going back through the messages, see if we had any questions or anything. I was kind of occupied. Well, I was just listening. I was very interested, but somebody said kind of like checking. Using a lighter to check for a gas leak. So I've got a really funny story that I would never say names, but I know of a custom Harley Davidson bike builder. Okay. I've met him personally. Somebody I'm really close to is very good friends with him, and a really down to earth, nice guy. But I mean, he's been on several of the TV shows and stuff. He's very well known. Well, many years back, him and a friend were coming out of Ohio. I think it was Thanksgiving, and I don't know where, but they were riding together so far, then they were splitting off, going to their different families for the holiday. Let's say the holiday. Well, the one started smelling fuel and pulled over. It's at night, so of course, they both pull over. Well, the now famous bike builder, not thinking, pulled out his lighter to get a better look and burned his bike to the ground. Burned it to the ground. Wow. And I just had to share that because as soon as I read, using a lighter to check for gas leak, and, he doesn't like people to hear it, but if it gets out, he admits to it. But, and I don't remember what Harley it was, but it was I want to say it was an old panhead bike, if I remember right, which is, a real classic, to have a panhead. Or I'm not 100% sure on it, but I know it wasn't like a newer, just normal Harley. This was a really nice bike. Burn it to the ground. Just burn it to the ground. Yeah, but, oh man, that just made me think of that. I apologize to the listeners. I got way off track, but, I had to share that.
It does make a point that that's what they call it, accidents. People get careless, and I know a guy that dropped a 30-pound parrot on his foot, and crushed his foot, and ended up having to have 4 or 5 operations on his foot. So shell didn't explode, but it still hurt him.
They're dangerous in many ways.
Yeah, yeah. Cori, of course, Lee Sanzo in our group, Lee and I and another guy were hunting one day at Port Hudson, and I was having a great day. I found a 20-pound parrot 2 inches deep laying flat, and about 10 feet away from it was literally a pyramid of shell shrapnel that the other relic hunters had stacked and left in the woods. Port Hudson had so many shells that they didn't even bring the shrapnel out. Nowadays, it's valued artifacts, but back then they would just leave it in the woods. And then I got hunting the side of a gully. I found a 30-pound parrot shell underneath the roots of a big beech tree. Took me 2 hours to dig it out. So, they kept saying, "Come on, we got to go. We're going to leave you. Just leave the shell. We'll get it later." I said, "No, I'm not leaving my shell." And so I got him. And so we said, our vehicle was a mile away. And so we decided to take a shortcut across this farmer's pasture. And the farmer didn't allow any relic hunting, and he would come and chase you if he caught you on his property. And we weren't going to relic hunt. We just wanted a shortcut because it was going to save us a half a mile to our truck. So we got out in the middle of this field, and here come that farmer in a pickup across that field. And I had a pouch full of mini balls and shrapnel, probably 15 pounds in my pouch, and I'm carrying 50 pounds of shells and a metal detector and a digging shovel. And they take off running. Of course, they're not weighted down, and they make it to the fence, and they're yelling at me, "Drop the shells, drop the shells. He's going to catch you." And I said, "I'm not leaving without my shells." And I hoofed it across that pasture carrying all of that. And I beat that guy to the fence, and I found out later that he was crippled and he couldn't chase anybody on foot. If he couldn't catch you in the pickup, then he couldn't catch you.
I thought you were going to tell us you made good friends with a farmer that day when he caught you about halfway through the field.
Yeah, and he says, "Oh, okay, I'll give you permission. Go ahead and hunt my field." His field would have been a great place to hunt too, but I said, we just wanted the shortcut because, man, I was thinking I've got to walk a mile carrying all this weight, and But it's amazing when adrenaline gets going what you can do when you're younger. Wow.
Right. I
Yeah.
don't know about you, Dorian, but I'm old enough now. If I get caught doing something I shouldn't be, I just accept it. Whatever. I'm not running. Just take me to jail or whatever.
Yeah.
Call the
Right. I
cops.
surrender.
Fine. I'll
Yeah.
deal with the
There you go.
consequences.
Yeah.
Well, guys,
Yeah.
are we about ready to wrap it up? Is there anything we wanted to add, or Dorian, do you got any more questions or anything?
Not specifically. I think we've covered a lot of ground, and Cori's brought out some great tips. You've been a great guest, Cori. Really appreciate having you.
Absolutely.
I enjoyed it. Hope I didn't put anybody to sleep, or not too many people to sleep.
No, absolutely
I do
not.
talk slow.
Yeah, then we're already got Bill saying we need to get you back on for round 2 sometime. So, and I would absolutely love that. But no, I agree. It was a great show. You did amazing. And when you teach Dorian something, I feel like you're top notch guest there, because that it's hard to teach that old time or something.
Hey, I'll tell you something. I could go out with Jeff and Katie, and they would teach me something. I've never met somebody who uses detectors that I couldn't learn something from. I don't care how new they are to the trade.
Oh, yeah, I agree, but you there's not much you don't know. I mean, you know a lot, Dorian. I've talked to you. You still surprise me.
Mike, that thing working at Garrett, it gave me an opportunity to have a wide range of experiences. But, I'm not an expert nugget hunter. I'm not an expert bottle digger. I'm a good bottle digger. I'm a fair nugget hunter. I'm a pretty good coin hunter. And if you want to call me great at anything, well, I've done pretty good on relic hunting, but there's guys, Cori's found more shells than me. Cori's found more plates than me.
Yeah.
I'm not truly one of the legends like Keith Wills. Cori's up there with those guys in terms of finds. I've just had a lot of fun and a lot of different experiences, and that's probably what I bring to the table, is just a kind of a wide range of experiences.
Yeah. Well, I think, if you look to Keith Wills and you talk to him, don't get me wrong, he loves to show off his collection and stuff, but that guy is not, oh, geesh, I lost the word. I mean, in no way does he think he's anything special, I guess is the way to put it. He's just out there enjoying it like anybody else, and still learning. And that's how you got to be, it really is. And I'm shocked when I run across these people that, have been doing it 5 years, and they think they think they're an expert and will tell you all about everything you don't know. They assume you don't know. Yeah, be humble. Keith's very humble. Thanks, Steve. That's the word I was looking for. Humble. Exactly.
Hey, listen, don't let Keith might be listening in. I don't know, but don't let Keith fool you. Keith's back is healing up good, and he's been able to start getting out more. He put it on 2 old boys I was hunting with him the other day, and he had them crying. He had them crying.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah. And
well, in my eyes, you're right up there with him, Dorian. And boy, I don't. But hey, I'll before you get a big head, I'll say I think as many tips that Cori gave us tonight, I think he might be a little bit above you.
I'm just wait a minute. Run that by me again.
I think
I'm
it's
not even close, Mike.
I think
learn
it's
something new every time I go out. I told you I have a partner. He kicks my ass every time I go out. So, I am still learning and always will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
Cori and I both ascribe to the doctrine that there's always a faster gun in town.
Right. Absolutely. Well, probably at your guys' level, not really, but it doesn't mean you can't still learn. And I think Jeff's in the room and he said, "Should I be offended by that, Dorian?" He's just making the point. You guys don't, Jeff and Katie are great people.
Offended? What, by what I said about I can learn from him?
Yeah, he's just joking. He's absolutely joking.
Well, all right. Let me do a right post here. Here's the thing, Jeff. I might learn a new mistake that you're making detecting.
Oh, that's me.
Yeah. Oh, I think it went too
Jeff
far
needs to
now.
beat you over the head with his shovel.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, when
There's a shovel that's going to put a knot on your head, Dorian.
yeah, well, Corey, if I knew Jeff like I knew you, we can kid each other and say some pretty tough stuff. No, nobody gets offended. But if I knew Jeff like I know you, I'd probably say to him something like, "Hey, man, don't challenge me to a battle of wits when you're only half equipped." No, we have a good time, don't we? I mean, it really is. Relic hunting buddies get together, and I'll tell you, whether you're sitting around the campfire with a cold one in your hand, telling the stories that you'll never tell on the air, or just out hunting and friendly competition and stuff. It's a great experience, and I've never ever lost my enthusiasm for it. In terms of it's just as exciting as it was when I dug my first silver coin. I'm looking forward to that next good signal. What might it be? Will it be a Confederate belt buckle or a flowing hair larch scent like we talked about, or something even better? You just don't know.
Yeah. Dorian, I don't want to hurt your feelings.
Every day is a treasure hunt.
Yeah, absolutely. Dorian, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I'll be honest with you. I think if you, Jeff, and Katie went out, Jeff would probably beat you. But now let me explain. Okay. See, when you go out with them, I learned they've got a technique. Katie's a talker. And I mean just blip, 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 blip. And what happened when we went out, she's literally stepping on my heels and talking to, I got to where I was just leaving my headphones on, but she'd just keep talking. Do you know how hard it is to talk when you got Katie in your ear going blip, 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 blip. So that is why Jeff would win. That's why they're a good team. They're good. I'm just kidding. Katie's going to kill me. Ooh, I'm going to be I hope Katie's not listening. No, Katie was. They're both a blast. I went too far. I think I went too far. Hey, Dorian,
we've already talked about taking them out this spring, Mike. So
good.
They'll get a chance, and I'll be forewarned. So I'll be ready for Katie.
They're absolutely fantastic people, and I had a blast detecting with them when I was back in Ohio. Do we have a treasure story tonight?
Oh yes, that's right. Dang, and you know what? I don't even have a riddle to make Bill work for it either. All right,
Bill,
real
quick. I don't know if you can talk, if you got much on it, or if anything you'd want to talk about it. He says he would love to hear about the Finn treasure. If you got something on the Finn treasure.
The what treasure?
The Finn, Fenn.
Okay, I can't give you anything on that one. Sorry. Ask him.
Forrest Finn. Well, I mean, you may not know about him.
Corey, you sent me some stuff on that, didn't you? I believe you sent.
He's a guy out. I don't know. He's a guy out of New Mexico. Modern treasure. So he's hidden some bunch of treasure somewhere between New Mexico and Colorado, I think. And he wrote a book with a bunch of clues in it, and I don't think it's been found. But if you don't know anything, I know next to nothing on it, and you know a little less than I do. So.
Okay.
I have to try another treasure story.
Yeah. Okay.
Ask Dorian about the Johnson Swift silver mine.
Yeah. Well, all that's written.
Don't have another couple of.
All that's written in my book. So, anybody wants to know about that, they can. They can read
buy the book.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. All right, Bill. I've got one for you. This is a KGC, as it turns out. Here a few years ago in Paducah, Kentucky, right on the Mississippi River, a fellow was coin hunting. He was not a relic hunter. And he was, he'd been detected 2 or 3 years, I think. And there were some poor people's houses. They were like kind of long and narrow, one story. They were longer than they were wide by quite a bit. And there was about
hold on, I'm sorry, real quick. Did you say poor people houses?
Yeah.
Were poor people houses longer than they were wide? Was that a thing? I'm sorry.
Mike,
I'm wondering if you're teaching if I'm should be learning something here.
Oh, no, this is not a standard. It just means that they were low income housing when they were built.
Okay.
And these houses were built probably back around the turn of the 20th century, somewhere around 1900.
Okay.
They were like one room wide, and about 5 rooms long, if that kind of gives you an idea. You walk right into the living room, and then there would be the dining room, then the kitchen, then the bedrooms, just in a straight line. And these were all built by the same contractor. Obviously, they were all alike. They had about grassy strips separating each of the two houses by 15 feet wide, maybe, and the length of the house, of course.
Okay.
Well, this guy was coin hunting around these old houses, gotten permission, and I don't remember if they were still being used or if they were empty. Maybe they were going to be scheduled for being torn down. I'm not sure now. But I do know this. He got hunting the third grassy strip there between those houses, and he got about 2/3 of the way coming from the back towards the front, and he dug up a small gold bar.
Mm.
And I say small, it wasn't one of those big 40, 60-pound ones, but it was about 15 pounds, a little more. And guess what, Bill? Guess what was stamped in the top of the bar, deeply stamped in it? KGC.
Wow.
And
that's interesting.
Yeah, and nobody has ever come up with an explanation as to what that one lone single bar with the letters KGC in it was doing buried there in that side yard about 3 or 4 inches deep.
Wow.
Yeah, if it was my gold bar, it would say "Made in China."
Yeah, right. Huh. I go right above Paducah when I go back to Ohio, because I go Arkansas to, I think, 55 and just up into Missouri. Then I cut over and I take the whole, most of the width of Kentucky over. I'm in Tennessee for a little bit. And then when I say above Paducah, I think just by a few miles. I forget, it's like 67 or something that cuts all, like Purchase Parkway and you got Purchase Parkway and I forget what, Kentucky Parkway maybe, and it's like 62. It's all the same road, but it's got several names. But I'm right above Paducah. I go all through there, and I'll tell you what, that's the best route ever. If you're ever coming back, a truck driver, many years of experience gave me that route, and you miss all of. You come out just west of West Memphis. You don't go through Nashville, none of that. And, and I don't know when's the last time you went through Little Rock, but Little Rock, I've hit Little Rock at rush hour and have had no trouble. I've never had trouble going through Little Rock. But you miss Nashville and all that, and Memphis, and but yeah, you take Kentucky all the way out into Tennessee for about an hour. I think you're in Missouri for probably less than a half an hour, and then dumps you right out into your northern Arkansas on 55.
Huh.
Yeah, real nice route.
I've traveled that route between Dallas and Kentucky here many times, but I've never gone that way, I don't think.
And Purchase Parkway and 62 and all that, it's all newer highway, and if you're at night, you'll go 10 miles and pass one vehicle at times. There's nobody on those roads, and they are beautiful. I mean, all nice, newer roads. They're not bumpy. They're not beat up. It's a beautiful, beautiful drive.
How'd you get onto that, Mike?
a friend who's been a truck driver forever.
Oh,
Yeah, gave me that route, and
well, they know.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
He hadn't driven it in several years, but he got a hold of some guys in his company that still do those routes into Texas, and they said, yeah, that's still what we use. And he had taught him that route many years ago,
Wow.
but it's a beautiful route. And I want to say if you do the typical route through Memphis and Nashville and all that, this is supposed to be like 45 minutes longer. I mean, in the trip from Ohio to Texas, though, which isn't a big deal to me. But he said, Mike, he goes, you can go through Memphis and all that, and then what's the other one? Nashville. He said, but I'm telling you, he said we've had guys sitting in there for hours at rush hour. It gets so bad. He said we avoided at all cost, and then he said, he said you might say if you hit it, hit it at the right time and you're fine, but he said you hit it bad and you'll sit there for that extra 45 minutes on my route. He said if you go that way, it could take 4 or 5 extra hours for your trip.
Wow.
So it's a beautiful route. I recommend it to anybody coming out from east, going west, in that area. Out that way, if you're heading into Arkansas or Texas or anywhere from Kentucky. But it's wonderful, absolutely.
Okay.
I'll give it to you if you ever head out this way. I'll draw it up for you, and because Google Maps doesn't want you, they fight you on it. But once you get so far in there, it takes over and sends you right the rest of the way. So I've driven it enough. I got it, guys. Let's call it a night. I've been sitting here too long, and I need to get up and do some walking. Let me tell you. But Cori,
right.
it has been absolutely a wonderful time. We'd love to get you back on sometime.
Sure, anytime. Just give me a little bit of a heads up.
Good deal.
Yeah.
As long as I'm not out somewhere
digging treasures. Yeah.
Hey, Mike. There you go. Why don't we do a live? We'll have Cori out there and have him rigged up with a microphone. Headphones.
I probably won't be finding anything.
Right. That's when you're not going to find anything. Guaranteed.
Oh yeah, but Cori, we're not going to have video. It'll just be audio, so you can find all kinds of stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Wow! Look at this Confederate belt buckle I just.
Yep. The Confederate buckles will be rolling in that day.
Oh yeah, buddy. Oh, hey Cori, do you remember the stories?
Thanks.
Do you remember the stories about the the old guys, the generation before us, how they would go out with those mine detectors and find 20 buckles a day?
Yeah, I'll give you, if people are really interested in relic hunting and they want to know how it was in the old days, and the old days here is like early 70s, read a book called The Relic Hunter by Howard Krauss.
Yep.
Oh my God. You'll salivate if you're a relic hunter.
I was,
It's just an amazing book.
I got an autographed copy when it first came out and got to hunt with Howard.
Mm. Yeah, he's a hell of a relic hunter.
Is he still alive?
No, he passed away maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Oh, I hadn't heard. I'm sorry to hear that. He was.
Yeah.
He was one of the best.
And that's a perfect book to get on interlibrary loan. You may not want it in your library, but if you want a good relic hunting read, get it on interlibrary loan.
Yeah, that's
absolutely.
I think there's a new version has been just reprinted. I'm not sure. I think that's true. But Mike, I think I'm probably keeping you from bedtime or whatever. So
yeah, well,
I appreciate you having me out.
Oh, hey, thank you for coming on. It has been absolutely fantastic. Been a great time, Cori.
Okay.
All right.
Well,
Dorian, appreciate
you
having me on. Say hi to Linda.
Sure will.
Everything's well. We'll catch you some other time.
Okay. Look forward to it, Cori.
Good night, Cori. Thank you so much. Good night to all the listeners.
Good night, everybody.
All right. Nice.